Hi, everyone. My name is Kathy Phelps, and I'm the Vice President of Experience here at Q-Centrix. I wanted to welcome all of you to our webinar. Today we have a very exciting guest who's going to give you a little insight about her experience at Q-Centrix. To get started, I do have a few things that I wanted to go over in terms of just quick review of what you're seeing on screen. First off, everyone is muted, and that's just to avoid any background noise. And then secondly, on the lower left-hand side of your screen, you should have a little chat box. We encourage you to ask questions. That's the benefit of a live webinar. So definitely ask some questions so we can ask Michelle, and I'm happy to answer anything that might be outside of Michelle's expertise. And then at the end, we'll answer anything outstanding. But you can do that throughout the presentation if you like. Without further ado, I am going to go ahead and introduce our guest speaker, Michele Pfeiffer. A little bit about Michelle. Michelle and I first met at the NCDR conference. She approached the booth, and she was so delightful. She was helpful. She answered a bunch of questions from folks that approached the booth to talk a little bit more about becoming a member of our team, and you know, it stayed in my mind forever because she's such a great advocate for the organization, and she has such a wonderful story to share. She's also an 80s music lover, a proud grandmother of 3, and a team leader at Q-Centrix, and she's going to tell you a little bit about what that means. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and say, take it away, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kathy, for that wonderful welcome, and thanks to everyone that's joined our call today. So I know everyone's time is precious, so I'll try to stay on point as much as possible. My name is Michele Pfeiffer, and my husband Dave and I live in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, and I've worked for Q-Centrix for just over about 5 years now. I'm currently a cardiovascular team leader with much of my focus on the CAF PCI and chest pain MI registries. I'll get into what that means in just a bit, but first I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. So I started out my nursing career in the 1980s in critical care, and I quickly found that I absolutely loved cardiac. And so I moved into the cardiac cath lab, where I spent the next 19 years working in a very busy cath lab in a large Baltimore hospital with 6 procedure rooms, and as you might suppose, lots of on-call. In the early 2000s, I was unfortunately in a very serious car accident, and I needed multiple surgeries. So though I loved working in the cath lab, it did become quite difficult to wear all the heavy lead, work the long hours, and take all of the on-call that was necessary in that type of hospital. So in about 2005, my hospital offered me the opportunity to become a data abstractor for its cath lab by abstracting records into the NCDR CAF PCI registry. Now, this was a really interesting way to use the knowledge I had, but in a very different manner. So after learning the CAF PCI registry, I then went on to learn the other cardiac registries that we participated in there, and those were specifically the ICD and STS registries, since back then the ACTION registry didn't exist yet. It was around 2009 our hospital came under the scrutiny of the federal government for an accusation of inappropriate stenting. So you might imagine the chaos that existed, especially when it turned out we were issued a CIA, that's known as a Corporate Integrity Agreement, and it was issued by the Office of the Inspector General. So we spent the next 5 years reporting the status of our compliance activities, which included things like developing standards and policies, implementing specific employee training programs, retaining independent review organizations to conduct regular reviews, and just a whole lot more. Now, at the beginning of being issued the CIA, our hospital quickly recognized a need for a person to oversee and manage these registries and all of the various reporting that was necessary to the OIG. So since I was familiar with the CAP-PCI registry and the ICD and STS, I really jumped at the opportunity. I knew it would be exhausting work, but I also knew it would offer me many ways to grow beyond my scope of practice, which at the time was a really exciting venture to me.
Thanks, Michele. You know, for those of you listening in, I'm sure you can see a little bit of what Michele is doing in your own work today. So we're going to keep going a little bit deeper into what Michele did before she came to Q-Centrix. So tell us a little bit about what else you managed while you were reporting into the OIG.
Oh, okay. Well, my job now at this point involved not just managing the abstraction teams for each registry, but then also reporting the outcomes to an administration that was really under a lot of pressure, as you can imagine, and then facilitating and participating in performance improvement activities to help improve patient care, along with all of the reporting that was necessary to the OIG. And it was around that same time, as a requirement of the CIA, that I also developed a blinded physician peer review program for the cardiac cath lab, which actually turned out to be one of the most collaborative peer review programs in the state. And eventually, we were asked to share our process with many other hospitals in and out of the state of Maryland. So it was also during this same time that NCDR introduced the Action Registry, which is now known as the Chest Pain MI Registry. Because this was a new registry and because there were so many questions and concerns, not just about the registry, but its criteria and understanding of the data definitions, I developed and chaired an action consortium for the state of Maryland, where the data managers met once a month to discuss the registry. And it was also at this time that I became a member of the Maryland Healthcare Commission's Cardiac Data Advisory Committee, which was a statewide regulatory agency that monitored the performance of each hospital performing PCI. So you might ask, why am I going into all of this detail about my past? Well, with a full-time job, seeing our hospital through the CIA, and participating in all of these outside committees, I typically found myself working an average of about 65 to 70 hours per week, sometimes more, and I worked in that capacity for 6 years.
Whoa, that's a ton of dedicated work, Michele, that I think probably some of the folks that are calling in today are familiar with. Wow.
Yeah, it really was, Kathy. And while it was an extremely rewarding experience, it was also exhausting and, quite honestly, unsustainable for me. Probably the hardest part for me was that I missed some family events, and it certainly seemed like I never had any downtime. So it was around sometime during that 6th year, I remember specifically one Sunday morning, I'm sitting on the deck having coffee with my husband Dave, and he said to me, "Honey, when the last of the kids go off to college, I want us to be able to live our dream of moving to the beach. We've talked about it for years, and now it's time to start planning it." And then he went on to say, "I know how much you love what you do, so maybe there's an opportunity for you to do that at the beach." Well, that conversation inspired me to begin my search of how best to make that happen. So the first thing I did was I reached out to our local hospital at the beach, but they were really only interested in me coming on full-time. And remember, at this point, I wanted to take a step back and enjoy life, especially if we were going to live at the beach. So I started thinking, well, what if I could do what I do, but do it remotely? So when I started looking into remote opportunities, one of the first companies I came across was Q-Centrix. Now at this point, you may be much more familiar with Q-Centrix than I was at that time. So back then, the company was only a few years old, and while I knew its core values matched mine, there wasn't really a way for me to chat with others that worked for the company. I only had the recruiter to speak with. But for me, joining the Q-Centrix team meant we could live our dream of moving to the beach. So I took the leap. And since that time that I joined the company, it's grown leaps and bounds to the point that now I work with over 800 quality experts who abstract full or part-time, and they do it all from home.
Michele, I love that you say that you took a leap, because I really think that's what it's all about. You just have to take a leap into something fairly new. We often hear from our existing team members that they love working from home once they get settled, but it is for sure a scary thought to leave, what you're familiar with, the hospital environment. What were some of the fears that you had when you first took that leap?
Well, that's a great question, Kathy. Just like you all may have, I had initial fears and hesitations about working remotely and with a new organization. So I worried, about having any meaningful interaction with others, because for many years I had been so entrenched in my work and working closely with so many people on a daily basis that it really gave me pause when I thought about how all that close contact with others in my field might go away. And I guess another hesitation, Kathy, was just missing the pure satisfaction I felt of being part of a team that identifies issues and works together to have great outcomes. I had loved being a part of a collaborative team, and to be honest, I wasn't convinced I'd have that same satisfying experience at Q-Centrix. But honestly, I couldn't have been more wrong. At Q-Centrix, you're provided tools that truly encourage constant communication. I touch base with all of my abstractors throughout the week, updating them on case assignments and completion needs, and offering my support however necessary, because I'm a true believer in using every opportunity to help our employees be as successful as they can be. And I do think you'll find that core value across the board at Q-Centrix, whether it be with your recruiter, your contact with our IT department, your senior manager, your team leader, or your fellow coworkers. Everyone here is just so supportive. I was also surprised by how working from home really created an efficient and protected work environment. So think about it this way. In an office setting, there's no opportunity to close out the world. Your phone rings, your door opens, people are constantly popping in and out. But at Q-Centrix, while you're provided many ways to communicate, whether it's by phone, email, Skype, instant messaging, or Microsoft Teams, the beauty is that for the most part, it's at your convenience. Because I don't know about you, but when I'm involved in reviewing a very complicated case, the last thing I want is my train of thought to be interrupted. So the absolute beauty of working for Q-Centrix is that both privacy and communication are all at your convenience. Now I have privacy when I need it and numerous ways to communicate with all 800 coworkers when I want it. Plus, I work at my own pace, and no 2 weeks look alike. So for example, one day I received an email from someone I wasn't familiar with at Q-Centrix. And I guess it was based on a recommendation from my manager. So I was asked to join a short-term project with a short-term deadline. I guess word had gotten around that I thrive on challenges with hard deadlines. So anyway, through that project, I was able to help a Florida-based hospital identify ways to improve their knowledge base of the PCI registry by using trends that I found while reviewing their records and data abstraction, as well as improving patient care based on some deficits that I found. So even in a remote environment, my experience and skill set were not only recognized, but also truly utilized to make an impact. I can't tell you how much this solidified my confidence that I was with an organization that encourages its employees to stretch beyond their typical workday.
Hey, Michelle, that's awesome. One of the things you just mentioned is how, word got around about how you thrived on challenges. I think word got around about a little bit more. Can you tell me about when you were asked to become a team leader?
Well, yeah. So as a team leader, I have several clients in very different demographics across the country who are really fully engaged in their data. I get a lot of joy out of sharing their outcomes and identifying issues and then collaborating with them to find solutions. And isn't that really the bottom line in our work, improving patient care? I mean, to abstract data is one thing, but when you come full circle and affect patient care in a positive way, that's really the pinnacle of the work.
That's a pretty important role, and I remember you said that you wanted to take a step back. So how did you end up managing team members and working with hospital leaders when you wanted to take a step back?
Well, so loaded question there, because in the beginning of my career with QCentrix, I really loved being pretty much a nobody. It was a refreshing change for me. I didn't have anyone to report to except my manager, of course, but there were no meetings with big groups of administrative executives under pressure and the like. So anyway, I was really quite happy in the role of abstractor. And in fact, when I signed on with QCentrix, I purposefully only committed to part-time work. So I had lots of freedom to do other things that I had missed for so long. But at the end of the day, I'm a very customer service-oriented type of person. So about 2 years into my job, I started to really miss that customer experience. So when we think about our customers, we all know we have both internal and external customers. And I had really enjoyed working with both of those customers in my old job. So I mentioned to my manager that I thought I was ready to pursue more responsibility within the company, but I still wanted to remain part-time. So for me, the role of team leader was perfect. I get to work with our internal customers, which for me is mostly our teams of abstractors, and I get to work with our external customers, which for me are our hospital partners. So it's been a win-win ever since. And really the key of making this job work for me was to come at it with a flexible mindset. So now I work about 20 hours per week, but during the weeks where I know I'm going to have to put in more like 30 hours, I just plan a little less free time that week. So at the same time that I'm striving to help hospitals improve their patient care, I'm also striving to improve my quality of life. I spend time with my family, which now includes not just 5 children, but 3 beautiful grandchildren. I travel with my husband, and in fact, we're about to visit Japan for the first time. Or I just sit on the beach for an hour in the middle of the day and enjoy this amazing life we've built.
I've always heard about Japan, so that's definitely a place on my bucket list. How is it that you were able to manage your work at Q-Centrix when you were doing this exotic traveling?
Well, that's a really easy question to answer. There are just so many supportive team members at Q-Centrix that as long as I give enough notice, I have all the support around me that I need to take time off. My teams are absolutely amazing. For the most part, they're very self-directed, and my senior manager is more than happy to fill my shoes while I'm gone. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is that working remotely for QCentrix provides a flexibility beyond anything I'd ever find working in a hospital or office setting. But, I will say no company is perfect. If you find one, please let me know. But if you're considering working remotely, here are just some tips and tricks that I've picked up along the way. So I would say the first thing to think about when coming on board with QCentrix is to plan for the onboarding process. So I'm the type of person that wants things done yesterday. So I can tell you it was a challenge to wait 8 weeks to gain access to my first client. But I think things move a little faster now than compared to 5 years ago. However, we still have a process in place that ensures our partner's data and your home setup are safe and secure. And that process can take a little time. So if you're someone that's dependent on your paycheck, this can be a hardship if you don't plan ahead of time. So I think that's why new employees are always encouraged to work at their current job until they have access to their first client. Second, I would say definitely make time for breaks throughout the day. Once you're up and running, you need to keep a routine of healthy habits and get up from the computer. So take your dog or just yourself for a short walk. Grab a cup of coffee with a friend, or maybe have that 10-minute chat with somebody you've been meaning to call. I do these little things to break up my day, and I always come back to the computer with a refreshed spirit. And finally, I would say get involved. When working remotely, it's really easy to make yourself feel isolated, but it's just as easy to feel a part of the team by doing a few simple things.
Michelle, that's a great point. One of the things that I think is the most intimidating about working in a remote environment is possibly, how you would get involved and meet coworkers. So how did you get involved and meet coworkers when you were working from home?
Sure. Well, I think, basically the first thing I did was I made sure that on a regular basis I reached out to my senior manager, my team leader at the time, because remember I was just an abstractor back when I first started. So I did reach out to my team leader on a regular basis. And the other thing I did was made sure that all of my fellow team members were very quick to reach on my Skype. So I instant messaged them a lot throughout my day. So whether you're trying to contact these people through texting, emailing, or instant messaging, by doing so, I wouldn't be surprised if you really made some truly remarkable friendships along the way like I did. And, I would also encourage everyone to attend as many town halls and webinars as possible. Seriously, I don't know if I've ever worked for a more collaborative organization. And I guess finally, don't ever be afraid to ask questions. Just remember, we're all here to help. So in the end, my bottom line is that your job is ultimately what you make it, whether you're in an office surrounded by people or you're working from home in your own little space in the world. So when you think about the culture of a company, I hope you aspire to be in an environment that supports your development, gives you a sense of self-worth, and makes you feel larger than yourself, because the work you do matters and your wins should be celebrated. You should always be encouraged to continuously grow and take risks and still enjoy life. I can wholeheartedly say that I work for a company that exemplifies these core values. So if these are core values you're looking for in a company, then I believe QCentrix is definitely the place for you.
Thanks, Michelle. I think it's really important that people hear it from our team. Just hear your story, hear how you feel about the organization. I don't think anyone can tell it better. But one of the things you mentioned is never be afraid to ask questions. So we're going to open it up for questions now. That's just really the true value of a live webinar, is it gives you an opportunity to ask us any question that's kind of been on your mind about working here at QCentrix and asking someone who does it day in and day out. Michelle's a great advocate for the organization, and she knows all about any questions that you might have. So I'm going to turn it over to Carlotta to catch us up on any questions we've received.
Thanks, Kathy. So we have about 5 minutes and a couple questions, but if anyone on the line can think of another question, feel free to send it in the chat box. So the first one is, what was the hardest part about working remotely?
Okay, well, as I mentioned, you do have to get past that feeling of being isolated. So, for example, in the hospital setting, we're all hands-on with definitions when we're abstractors there, and we get lots of feedback from each other. But in a remote situation, you don't always have that colleague right at your fingertips. So it's important to not just be self-directed, but to feel comfortable reaching out to someone you've never put a face to. So in other words, don't feel as though your call or your email or text is an interruption, because it's not. We all reach out to each other quite frequently during the day.
All right, here's another question, and just for some background information, as part of the application process, you'll chat with a few folks and take a test. So this attendee wants to know if you have any tips or tricks related to the test you take during your application process.
Oh, sure. So I would say, certainly if you have been an abstractor for the registry, you're familiar with these definitions, but I would absolutely advise have that data definition workbook open while you're taking the test, because even though I've been doing these registries for years and years, my brain doesn't hold every definition with every target value. So I had that book open and referred to it quite frequently during the test, and I still refer to it day in and day out. So that would be my biggest advice to anyone.
Awesome. It looks like we have time for one last question. It's a two-parter. Are your team members on a contract basis, and if so, do you offer benefits?
I'm going to turn that over to you.
I can go ahead and take that one, Michelle. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a quick note about employment at QCentrix. We're everyone that works at QCentrix is an employee of QCentrix, and that means we invest in you, we care about you, we care if you're engaged, and we definitely reach out to our employees to check in, make sure that they're happy in their roles. So they aren't contract employees, and that's something that differentiates us certainly in the market if you're looking around for a similar role. And then the second question was if we offer benefits. And so we have a uniqueness there as well. 30 hours a week for us is equivalent to full-time. So if you work full-time with us, you're absolutely offered the benefits. We have a robust benefits package that includes 401k, health and dental, and all of the things that you're all used to. So certainly you're eligible for benefits at 30 hours, and all of our employees are employees, just that. I think that'll do it for us. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to shoot them our direction. We're always happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much, Michelle, for your honest story and your 2 cents about coming to work for QCentrix. We just loved hearing it. Everyone have a great day. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.